Hello, Calvary. It is Wednesday. It's about 4 o'clock now, and by the time I get this uploaded, it'll probably be closer to 4:30 or 4:45. But I wanted to come to you today and just kind of share a midweek thought with you. I know it's Holy Week this week, and for so many of us, it just doesn't feel like Holy Week. It feels so strange to not be able to do a Good Friday service. And I spoke with one of you today, and you said it was just so hard to believe that it is Easter weekend this weekend, and yet we're not going to be together as a church family. And that is just so hard to believe. But it's all in the plan of the Lord, and I believe we're doing the right thing by obeying our governing authorities and who have asked us not to meet together for our own good and for our own safety. So with it being Holy Week, I wanted to bring to you just a kind of a unifying thought for all of us who watch this video, just to bring our thoughts together and be thinking about the events of this week and about everything that they signify. And traditionally, Wednesday is known as Silent Wednesday. Now, some people call it Spy Wednesday. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I'd have to try to look that up. But I've always referred to it as Silent Wednesday, and the reason why is because as you look through the Gospels, you look through that chronology of Mark, there's not a lot of information in fact, there's no information of anything that Jesus did on Wednesday. Now, Tuesday is when all the opposition happened. A lot of people challenging him, religious authorities testing him. The Olivet Discourse happened on Tuesday, as far as we can tell. And Thursday was the Last Supper with his apostles, the Upper Room Discourse in John, Gethsemane, ultimately the arrest, the midnight trials in the temple. Friday, he's taken before Pilate, who sends him to Herod, who sends him back to Pilate. Ultimately, he is crucified on Friday. So, but as far as Wednesday goes, there's just no information out there. And so we've always called it Silent Wednesday. It's a good time for us to, as the Psalm says, to be still and know that God is our God. And we don't know, maybe there was activity on Wednesday that's just not recorded. Perhaps Jesus is resting in Bethany all day Wednesday, which is what most people seem to think is probably the case. We just don't know. There's no way to know. But typically Wednesday, people do take this as an opportunity to talk about the role of Judas. We kind of estimate that maybe Wednesday, if there's not a whole lot going on, that would have been really the only opportunity Judas would have had to kind of get away from Jesus and the other 11 to go and make this arrangement with the priest. Now, again, we can't be dogmatic about any of this. But in Mark chapter 14 especially seems to indicate that maybe those arrangements were made on Thursday as well. We just don't know. But what we do know is that Wednesday is typically the time that we do talk about that. And what I want to do to talk about it is go to the book of Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 11 is called an Antichrist chapter. And the reason it's called an Antichrist chapter is because Zechariah does something very, very interesting and profound, and also that has significance for not only Christ himself and Israel, but also for Judas Iscariot. And so in chapter 11, beginning in verse 4, thus says the Lord my God, become shepherd of the flock, doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished, and those who sell them say, blessed be the Lord, I have become rich. And their own shepherds have no pity on them. For I will no longer have pity on the inhabitants of this land, declares the Lord. Behold, I will cause each of them to fall into the hand of his neighbor, and each into the hand of his king, and they shall crush the land, and I will deliver none from their hand. And so in verse 7, it says, So I became shepherd of the flock doomed to be slaughtered by the sheep traders. And I took 2 staffs, one named Favor, and the other I named Union, and I tended the sheep. And in 1 month I destroyed the 3 shepherds, and I became impatient with them, and they also detested me. So I said, I will not be your shepherd. What is to die, let it die. What is to be destroyed, let it be destroyed. And let those who are left devour the flesh of one another. And I took my staff Favor, and I broke it, annulling the covenant I made with all the peoples. So it was annulled on that day, and the sheep traders who were watching me knew that it was the word of the Lord. So that can be a little hard to understand. Let me give you kind of the picture here. Zechariah is basically being told by God, I want you to put on a play in front of Israel. So just like Sight and Sound Theater in Branson or something like that, he's putting on a performance in front of them, and he's putting on the performance of a shepherd. And the shepherd that he is shepherding is a flock that is doomed to be slaughtered. And he's shepherding them with 2 staffs. One he calls Favor, the other he calls Union. And as he shepherds this flock, multiple under shepherds come over him, and they are not doing well, and so he destroys the 3 of them. And basically he says, I'm tired of the sheep's rebellion, and whatever's going to happen, allow it to happen. Let the consequences of their sin take place. And he breaks the staff called Favor, which signifies that he is annulling the covenant that he made with that flock. Well, the people figure out in verse 11 that this play is about them. You know, kind of like when Hamlet puts on the play for his stepfather, and his stepfather recognizes that this play is about him. The same thing is basically happening here, that Zechariah is performing this play in front of them, and the people of Israel begin to recognize that we're the sheep in the play, and they don't like that. And they basically say, we want you to stop. We don't want you to be our shepherd anymore. And so, as a result, in verse 12, Zechariah then says to them, if it seems good to you, then give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. So what's the significance of this? Well, you recognize the 30 pieces of silver, right? Because that goes back to Judas. But what's the larger significance of this? Is that Zechariah is putting on this play, and he's demonstrating that this is your shepherd, this is your king, this is your God who is shepherding you, and yet you are rejecting him as being king over you. You are rejecting your shepherd. Therefore, if it seems good to you to give me, then value out my wages, but if not, then keep them. Well, they value out his wages for the play, and basically for being the shepherd. And they pay him 30 pieces of silver. Now, we're not sure what exactly the value of 30 pieces of silver is, if that's a value, or if that's a low value, if that's more of an insulting kind of value. It's kind of hard to be sure about that. But what we do know is that it is the price of a slave. And so they basically come up to their shepherd and say, we do not want you to be our shepherd anymore. And they give him the price of a common house slave and say, be gone. Do not be our shepherd anymore. And of course, in verse 13, it gets even more specific, because then the Lord says to Zechariah, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. And of course, we know that the money that was given for Jesus was ultimately used to pay for a potter's field. So then, from that point, Zechariah breaks the staff called Union. And now both staffs are gone. God is not shepherding them anymore. And now he puts on a different play. Only this time he is a worthless shepherd. And this time he is ruling over the flock, and he himself is destroying this flock. And the significance of this is that when Israel chooses, when they reject God as their king, when they reject worshiping God, they don't stop worshiping. But instead, they choose a worthless shepherd to rule over them instead. And the bigger significance of this is not just the exact price of 30 pieces of silver, even though that is precise and that is significant. It's not just the fact that it was used to throw to the potter, just like we see in the book of Matthew and what was done for the betrayal money of Jesus. It was thrown in the temple, and then it was used to purchase a potter's field. Not just all of that. That is the significant, but it's not the big significance. The big significance is that Israel, for the price of a common house slave, has rejected God as their king. And in God's place is set a worthless shepherd who ultimately destroys the nation. And of course, that's exactly what we see. We see that Israel rejected Christ as their king. They rejected their Messiah. And they paid for his life for 30 pieces of silver. And then they took him before the Roman government. And do you remember what they said to Caesar? They said, "We have no king but Caesar." Right? And then ultimately what happens? 40 years down the road, Rome is going to destroy them brick for brick. Not a brick of the temple is left standing. He destroys them all. And so all of this is significant in the life of Jesus Christ. And what I want to encourage us today in the what we call Silent Wednesday is to just be silent for a moment and think about this. Is God truly our shepherd? Is Christ truly our good shepherd? Or are we looking for someone else or something else to rule over us? Are we looking for a worthless shepherd that in the end is just going to tear our souls apart? Who is truly our king? The good shepherd who lays his life down for the sheep, or a worthless shepherd who's going to destroy our soul? And so that's the question I want to ask you today. And I want to try to unify our thoughts around those things. I pray that the Lord will bless you. And I pray this Holy Week, even as we are all apart and isolated, I pray that even now you are growing in your faith in Jesus Christ. God bless.